You wake up early. The alarm goes off. You grab your phone, maybe scroll for a few minutes, and then you start getting ready for work. You commute. You sit through meetings. You work 8, sometimes 10 hours a day. And at the end of the week, your paycheck finally hits your bank account. Now, to your credit, you're trying to do the right things. You're not just spending everything. Maybe you've set up a 401k contribution through your employer. Maybe a small percentage of your income automatically goes into savings. You've probably watched a few personal finance videos, maybe even read a book or two. So on paper, you're doing what responsible adults are supposed to do. But here's the strange part. Despite working hard, despite saving, despite trying to be financially responsible, it still feels like something is missing. Your savings are growing, but not dramatically. Your investments are moving, but not life-changing. Your debt might be shrinking, but slower than you expected. And every once in a while, a thought pops into your head. Am I actually doing this the right way? Because here's the thing. A lot of people assume that if they just work hard, save a little, and contribute to their 401k, everything will eventually work itself out. But here's what most people don't realize. Some of the most common decisions people make inside their 401k, decisions that feel completely normal, can quietly cost them tens of thousands of dollars over time. Sometimes even more than $100,000. Not because they made a reckless investment, not because the market crashed, but because of a few small mistakes that compound slowly over decades. And the tricky part? Most people don't even realize they're making them. Now look, before we go any further, let's get one thing clear. A 401k is still one of the most powerful financial tools available to the average worker. It gives you tax advantages. It often comes with an employer match. And it allows your investments to grow for decades. That's a powerful combination. But here's the thing. Just having a 401k doesn't automatically mean you're building wealth efficiently. And this is where things start to get interesting. Because over the course of a 30 or 40-year career, tiny financial decisions start to compound. Not just your investments, your choices. A slightly lower contribution rate. A slightly more conservative investment. A few years of paused contributions. A fund with slightly higher fees. Individually, none of these decisions seem like a big deal. In fact, most of them feel completely normal. But over decades, these small differences quietly turn into massive gaps in outcomes. Two people can earn the same salary, work the same number of years, even contribute roughly the same amount to their retirement accounts. And yet one of them retires with hundreds of thousands of dollars more. Now you might be thinking, okay, but how big of a difference are we really talking about? Here's what most people don't realize. Some of the most common 401k mistakes millions of workers make every single year, can easily cost $100,000 or more over the course of a career. Not from bad luck, not from risky bets, just from small decisions that compound in the wrong direction. And once you understand where these mistakes happen, it becomes much easier to avoid them. Before we dive deeper into this, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is David, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. If you're someone who feels stuck financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now look, the reason I spend so much time thinking about money isn't because I'm obsessed with getting rich overnight. It's because personal finance has this strange habit of looking simple on the surface, while being surprisingly complicated underneath. You'll hear advice like, just invest in your 401k. Save 10% of your income. Buy index funds and hold them forever. And to be fair, those are all good starting points. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Financial advice often focuses on the big ideas, but ignores the small decisions that actually make the biggest difference over time. For example, two people might both contribute to their 401k for 30 or 40 years. On paper, they're doing the exact same thing, but one of them retires with $600,000, while the other retires with $1.2 million. Same system, same type of account, completely different outcome. So what happened? This is where it gets really interesting. Most of the difference doesn't come from picking the perfect stock, or timing the market, or having some secret investment strategy. It usually comes down to a handful of very common decisions people make along the way. Decisions that feel small at the time, but when those decisions compound over decades, they quietly turn into six-figure mistakes. So let's talk about the advice most people hear when it comes to retirement and 401k investing. If you've ever watched personal finance videos, read a blog post, or talk to someone about saving for retirement, The advice usually sounds something like this. Contribute to your 401k. Get the employer match. Invest in index funds. Leave the money there and don't touch it until retirement. Now look, none of that advice is wrong. In fact, it's actually pretty good advice for someone who's just starting to think about their financial future. But here's the thing. Good advice isn't always complete advice, and this is where a lot of people get stuck. Because personal finance content often simplifies things in order to make them easier to understand. But when things get simplified, the trade-offs disappear. For example, you'll rarely hear people talk about questions like, should you prioritize your 401k contributions or paying off debt? Should you invest beyond the employer match or direct that money somewhere else first? Should you choose a traditional 401k or a Roth 401k? And how aggressive should your investments actually be when you're in your 20s or 30s? Now you might be thinking, well, does that stuff really make a big difference? And the short answer is yes, it absolutely can. Because over a 30 or 40-year career, small financial decisions don't stay small. They compound. A slightly lower contribution rate, a slightly more conservative investment, or ignoring certain details in your retirement plan. Over time, those tiny differences can quietly turn into tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost wealth. And that's exactly where the first major mistake starts to show up. Let's start with one of the most common, and honestly one of the most painful, 401k mistakes people make. Not taking the full employer match. Now on the surface, this seems like something that should never happen. I mean, if your employer is offering to give you free money for your retirement, why wouldn't you take it? But here's what most people don't realize. This happens all the time. According to research from the Federal Reserve and retirement plan providers, millions of workers either don't contribute to their 401k at all, or they contribute less than what's required to receive the full employer match. And financially speaking, that's one of the most expensive mistakes you can make. Here's a simple example. Let's say you earn $60,000 a year. Your employer offers a 401k match of 100% on the first 4% of your salary. That means if you contribute 4%, you invest $2,400 per year. Your employer also contributes $2,400. So every year, a total of $4,800 goes into your retirement account. Now imagine you only contribute 2% instead of 4%. Maybe you want a slightly larger paycheck today. Maybe you're trying to manage other expenses. Completely understandable. But here's the hidden cost. By contributing only 2%, you're leaving $200 of employer money on the table every single year. And this is where it gets really interesting. If that extra $200 had been invested and earned an average 7% annual return over 30 years, that one decision could cost you over $120,000 by the time you retire. Not because you made a bad investment, but because you didn't take the free money that was offered to you. So if the employer match is basically free money, why do so many people still miss out on it? This is where things move beyond simple math and into human psychology. Because money decisions are rarely just logical. They're emotional. There's a concept in behavioral economics called present bias. And here's what it means in simple terms. Humans naturally place much more value on rewards today than rewards in the future. So when someone looks at their paycheck and sees that contributing more to their 401k will reduce their take-home pay, even by a small amount, their brain immediately focuses on the short-term loss. Maybe that extra contribution reduces their monthly paycheck by $100. That feels real, that feels immediate. But the long-term benefit, an extra $100,000 or more in retirement, feels distant and abstract. And because it's so far in the future, our brains tend to discount its importance. Now combine that with another powerful psychological force called loss aversion. Research in behavioral finance shows that people feel the pain of losing money about twice as strongly as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. So even though contributing more to your 401k is technically gaining free money from your employer, your brain interprets the smaller paycheck as a loss, and losses feel uncomfortable. So people delay the decision. They say things like, I'll increase my contribution next year, or I'll start saving more once my income goes up. But here's the thing. When it comes to investing, time is one of the most valuable assets you have. And every year you delay taking full advantage of that employer match is another year of compounding that never gets the chance to start. Now let's talk about the second mistake. And this one is a little more subtle. Being too conservative with your investments too early. Look, The idea of playing it safe with money sounds responsible. Most of us grow up hearing things like, don't take unnecessary risks. Protect your money. Better safe than sorry. And in many areas of life, that's great advice. But when it comes to long-term investing, especially inside a retirement account like a 401k, playing it too safe can actually become a very expensive decision. Here's the thing. A lot of younger investors end up putting their money into very conservative funds, maybe bond-heavy portfolios, maybe stable value funds, or sometimes target date funds that lean more conservative than they realize. Why? Usually because they're afraid of market crashes. And to be fair, that fear isn't irrational. Markets do go down, sometimes dramatically. But here's what most people don't realize. When your investment horizon is 30 or 40 years, volatility becomes much less dangerous. In fact, historically speaking, the biggest long-term risk for young investors isn't market crashes. It's not participating enough in market growth. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine two people both start investing at age 25. They each invest $6,000 per year into their retirement account. Investor A chooses a more stock-heavy portfolio that averages around 7% per year. Investor B chooses a more conservative mix that averages around 4% per year. After 40 years, the difference is staggering. Investor A ends up with roughly $1.2 million. Investor B ends up with around $570,000. Same discipline, same yearly contributions, but over $600,000 difference in the final outcome. And it all came down to one thing: how much long-term growth their portfolio was actually exposed to. Now let's talk about another mistake that seems small in the moment, but can have surprisingly large consequences over time. Pausing your 401k contributions. Look, life isn't perfectly predictable. Expenses go up. Unexpected things happen. Maybe rent increases. Maybe you have medical bills. Maybe you lose your job or go through a financially difficult period. And when people need to adjust their budget, one of the first things that often gets cut is retirement contributions. Now, to be clear, sometimes that decision is unavoidable. If you're trying to keep up with essential expenses, protecting your financial stability in the present obviously matters. But here's the part most people don't realize. Early contributions are incredibly powerful. Not because they're bigger, but because they have the most time to compound. Think of compounding like a snowball rolling down a long hill. At the beginning, the snowball is small. It doesn't look very impressive. But as it keeps rolling, it picks up more snow, grows larger, and starts accelerating. The earlier that snowball starts rolling, the bigger it becomes over time. Now imagine someone starts investing $5,000 per year at age 25. Everything goes smoothly for a few years. But then they pause their contributions between age 30 and 35. Maybe life got busy. Maybe expenses increased. Maybe they plan to restart later. 5 years doesn't sound like a huge gap, but this is where compounding quietly does its work. Assuming a long-term return of around 7%, that 5-year pause could reduce their retirement balance by roughly $150,000 to $200,000 by the time they reach retirement. And the surprising part? Most people never even notice the impact, because the real cost doesn't show up until decades later. Now let's talk about one of the most invisible, but surprisingly expensive mistakes people make inside their 401k: ignoring fees. And the tricky part about fees is that they usually don't look dangerous. Most people see something like 0.8%, 1%, maybe 1.2% and think, that doesn't seem like a big deal. After all, it's just a small percentage, right? But here's the thing. When it comes to long-term investing, small percentages compound just like investment returns do. Except instead of growing your wealth, they slowly eat away at it. This is where it gets really interesting. Let's say someone invests $500 per month into their retirement account for 35 years. If their portfolio earns an average return of 7% per year, they would end up with roughly $830,000. Now imagine the exact same investment, the same contributions, the same market performance, but the funds inside the account charge about 1% in annual fees. That reduces the effective return to around 6%. At first glance, a 1% difference sounds tiny, but over 35 years, that small gap becomes enormous. Instead of $830,000, the final balance ends up closer to $670,000. That's a difference of roughly $160,000. Gone. Not because the market performed poorly, not because the investor made a bad decision, but simply because of higher fees quietly draining returns year after year. And here's what most people don't realize. Many low-cost index funds have expense ratios below 0.1%, which means the difference between choosing the right fund and the wrong one could literally mean six figures over a lifetime. Now, after hearing all of this, you might start thinking something like, okay, so I just need to contribute more to my 401k and pick good investments. And yes, that's definitely part of the strategy. But here's the thing. People who become financially successful over time usually think about money a little differently. They don't just ask how much they should invest. They ask a more strategic question. Where should each dollar go to create the most impact? Because not all dollars have the same job. Some dollars should go toward building long-term wealth through investments like a 401k. Some dollars should go toward eliminating expensive debt. And some dollars should stay liquid and accessible in case life throws something unexpected your way. This is where it gets really interesting. Many people treat financial decisions like a simple checklist. Invest in retirement, save money, pay off debt. But wealthy investors tend to think in terms of priority and efficiency. For example, imagine you're carrying credit card debt with a 20% interest rate. If you invest your money in the stock market and earn an average return of 7%, but your debt is growing at 20%, you're still falling behind financially. In that case, paying off the debt is mathematically the better investment. But here's the twist. If your employer offers a 100% 401k match, that contribution effectively gives you an instant 100% return. And that's almost impossible to beat anywhere else. So the smarter strategy often looks something like this. First, capture the full employer match. Then focus on eliminating high-interest debt. And after that, continue increasing your investments over time. It's not about choosing one path. It's about using each dollar in the smartest order possible. So after all of that, the natural question becomes, what should you actually do from here? Because understanding these mistakes is helpful. But the real value comes from making small adjustments that improve your financial trajectory over time. The good news is that you don't need a complicated strategy to fix most of these issues. In fact, a few simple steps can make a surprisingly large difference over the next few decades. First, take a look at your 401k contribution percentage. Many people set their contribution rate once when they start a job and then never revisit it again. But salaries change, expenses change, and your financial priorities evolve over time. So the first step is simply checking whether you're contributing enough to receive the full employer match. If you're not, that's usually the easiest and most powerful adjustment you can make. Second, review the investment options inside your 401k plan. Most retirement plans offer a list of different funds, and not all of them are created equal. Take a moment to look at the expense ratios and the overall strategy of the funds you're invested in. If your plan offers low-cost index funds, those are often a strong long-term option because they keep fees extremely low while providing broad market exposure. Third, consider increasing your contributions gradually over time. A lot of people feel overwhelmed when they hear recommendations like saving 15% or 20% of their income. But you don't have to get there overnight. Instead, try increasing your contribution by 1% each year. Most people barely notice the difference in their paycheck, but over time, those increases can significantly accelerate the growth of your retirement account. And finally, try to avoid making emotional investment decisions. Markets will go up. Markets will go down. That's completely normal. But long-term wealth is usually built by staying consistent, staying invested, and allowing time to do most of the heavy lifting. So when people talk about building wealth, they often focus on the big moments: landing a high-paying job, making a great investment, starting a successful business. And while those things can certainly help, the reality is that for most people, long-term wealth isn't built through one big breakthrough. It's built through small decisions repeated consistently over time. Here's the thing. Your 401k isn't just another account sitting in the background of your financial life. It's one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available to the average worker. It allows you to invest automatically. It gives you tax advantages. And in many cases, it even includes free money from your employer. But like any powerful tool, its impact depends on how you use it. Small choices, like your contribution rate, the funds you select, how you react during market downturns, and whether you take full advantage of employer matching, quietly shape the outcome over the course of decades. And that's why two people with similar incomes, similar careers, and similar opportunities can end up with completely different financial futures. One retires with a few $100,000. The other retires with well over $1 million. Same system, same opportunities, just different decisions along the way. So the next time you log into your 401k account, don't just check the balance. Ask yourself a better question. Am I using this tool as effectively as possible? Because the difference between average decisions and strategic decisions today could easily be worth $100,000 or more in your future.